Hey, book lovers. Want to hear a story? Welcome back to Storytime with Em. This is a mini episode from Em's Books and Cats podcast, where I am sharing my books a chapter or two a week. And right now we are on chapter 19 of Feelers. Enjoy. Neil led me through the dark, twisting halls wordlessly. He carried the torch Cal had left, and it cast just enough glow for me to see him. He moved swiftly and confidently through the dark, and I struggled to keep up. The floor was uneven, and I tripped and stumbled on my way down the hall. We came to a dead end eventually, and Neil turned to face me for the first time. Now we climb. He placed the torch, which had almost burned out, into another holder on the wall. As it clicked into place, there was a quiet grinding sound, and a panel in the wall slid open. We squeezed into a small space behind the wall, and the panel slid closed. A dim light came from above, illuminating the ladder carved into the smooth stone wall, and Neil gestured to it impatiently. Get climbing. The rough handholds ripped up the tips of my fingers as I tried to hoist my weight up the awkward ladder. Neil sighed with impatience below me. Keep going. You're almost there. My arms were trembling, and I could feel my fingers slipping. My hands were impossibly sweaty. Neil grunted, and I dug in and reached tentatively above me. My hand found a wide, flat ledge, and I felt a rush of excitement as I pulled myself onto the smooth, cool stone. Neil hoisted himself up in one fluid motion and landed on his feet beside me. He held out his hand, and I stared at it. He sighed with impatience. Take my hand or don't, but I am here to help you, Jane. I stared at him. Jane, my scientific name. It had never fit, never felt quite right. Hesta felt better. Neil was not one of us. I was certain of it now. I could not trust him. I took his hand and allowed him to help me to my feet. I even smiled a little in gratitude. No reason for him to know I was onto him. Better to let him think I was being agreeable. He pushed on a section of wall. A small opening appeared, and a thin sliver of gray light slipped in. Neil put his fingers into the opening and strained against the slab of cement. It inched open until there was room for us to slip through. Hurry! Neil's voice was strained with the effort. I pushed through the small space and turned to pull the door as Neil slipped through. The wall slammed back into place when I released it, and Neil stood beside me, blinking in the gray light and looking confused. He turned to me. I'm not supposed to be here. What? This is outside the city. The sacred forest. I'm not supposed to be here. But you're supposed to lead me. Only to the door. I followed you because... He paused with a grim expression. I knew she would kill me if I stayed. Why would she... I saw Cal. You think he was sleeping? I had, honestly. It didn't occur to me that Misha would have killed him. Neil saw my face and nodded. She killed him. Believe it. She's killed many. Why would you work for her? Neil smiled sadly. Most of us don't have a choice who we serve. Survival. That's all there is. The ground under my feet was hard, dry earth. Behind us was a thick wall. The old city wall. Crumbling now. No longer needed for protection. I vaguely remembered the lesson in school about the city's early days. What had it been protecting the city from? There was a low rumble and the ground shook under our feet. Run! Neil took off across the dry expanse and I followed without question. The thick, dark forest stood before us and grew closer every moment. An explosion sent us flying off our feet. I landed hard on my chest and felt my breath leave me in a rush. The tower in the wall, the one we had just escaped, was a pile of rubble and smoke. I stared at it a while, trying in vain to catch my breath. A wave of smoke flowed over me, and the world vanished. Hands grabbed me roughly under my arms, and others lifted my feet. I thrashed and fought as best I could against them. Enough, said a voice in the smoke. Sleep. I tried to fight the heaviness in my eyelids, but they would not stay open. I surrendered to their weight and the relief from the burning smoke. Everything slipped into darkness. I woke on a pillow of soft moss. The canopy overhead was thickly woven branches. I sat up quickly and the pain exploded behind my eyes. I grabbed my head and buried my face in my hands. "Go easy," a low voice said. "You've been through quite a lot." I removed my hands from my face and tried to focus on the source of the voice. Seated in the thick roots of a massive tree was a squat little man, the shape and color of a boulder. His golden eyes shone in the dim light, casting a ghostly glow around him. A noise to my left drew my attention. Neil was tied to a thick tree trunk and gagged with a dirty cloth. He struggled against his bonds when he saw he had my attention. I jumped to my feet and tried to ignore the bright burst of stars I saw. I stood unsteadily before the little gray man, who smiled and did not move from his seat amongst the roots. "Who are you? What do you want?" The man smiled, and his pointed yellow teeth made me wish he hadn't. "I'll ask the questions," he snarled. "This is my land, after all." He spat on the ground and stood. He was half my height and twice the width. He moved in bouncy steps across the small space between us. His glowing eyes dimmed as he stared into mine. "You, I was expecting." His head rolled to the left and cast a bright gaze on Neil. He pointed a gnarled finger at him. His nails were filed sharp and yellow. "No one told me about this." Neil's eyes widened in terror. Sparks of electricity were dancing on the end of the little man's gruesome fingernail. "Stop." My voice startled everyone, including me. It was a low, quiet command, but it sent a shockwave through the forest around us. The leaves rippled with its force. The little man lowered his finger, stared at me, and dropped suddenly to his knees. "I'm sorry. Don't hurt me, please. I'm only doing my job." He was shaking and kept his eyes trained on the ground. They had lost most of their strange glow. I put my hands on my hips and tried to seem in control. "Get up. Who are you? What's your job here?" The little man sat up sniveling and wiped his nose. His dim eyes narrowed a little. Something I had said made him angry. "I am Boro, guardian of the Western Path. My family has been protecting this path since the early days." "Thank you for your service, Boro. And your families." This softened him a little. He nodded. "I've been watching for you. They said you would come. They also said you'd be alone." I glanced at Neil. His face was pale. He stared at me with wide eyes. "Well, I'm not alone. Neil is my guide, as appointed by Misha." Boro's eyes grew wide and his lip quivered. "Misha?" He looked at Neil for a long time. "All right, I guess. I was not notified of this, but if you will answer for him." "I will." I waved my hand toward Neil. "Untie him. Now." The little man scurried to Neil and undid his binds. Neil rubbed his wrists and grimaced. In a swift, sudden movement, he brought the back of his hand across the man's cheek. The man didn't move. Neil's hand stopped suddenly with a sickening crack. The man chuckled at Neil's dumbfounded expression. "Yep, you lab boys are all the same. So temperamental. Quick tip. My kind are closer to stone than flesh. We're very hard to injure, and impossible to destroy." "Nothing is impossible." Neil spat. His face was red with pain and rage. He turned to me. "Banish this fool. You know you can. We both know the extent of your powers." "I'm not going to do that. The only thing he's injured is your pride." "Guess you should have left me inside the tower like Misha planned." "No, I'm glad I didn't. You don't deserve to die. But you do need to apologize. Now." Neil and Boro shared the same expression of disbelief, but Neil swallowed hard and straightened his spine. He looked Boro in the eye, right into his golden gaze, and apologized. Boro nodded his acceptance. "Fine, fine. We have to get moving. The edges of the forest are not safe." He turned his glowing eyes to me. "Especially not for your kind." My stomach flipped nervously, but I tried to hide my fear. I straightened my spine and nodded. "Lead the way. Neil, you walk in front of me. Behave yourself." Neil glared at me, but shuffled into place behind Boro. "I'm not going to do anything," he muttered. Boro led us up a narrow path that followed the ledge of the large rock face. The path switched back sharply, and we climbed until the clearing looked tiny below us. The path was worn smooth with age and weather, and a little rivulet of water flowed against us, making the stones slippery and treacherous. Fear bubbled and gurgled inside me. I felt woozy. My foot slipped, dropping me onto one knee and sending my heart into my throat. A hand grabbed me. Neil squeezed my arm. Relax. You're not going to fall. Take a moment. You need to breathe. I hadn't noticed until then that I was holding my breath and trembling violently. I struggled to take in a deep breath, and after a few attempts was able to draw in some cold, rejuvenating air. My heart rate slowed, and my body stopped shaking. Thank you, I whispered. Neil gave my arm another squeeze before he let go. Come on. That strange little man isn't waiting. I got to my feet and swayed unsteadily when I glanced over the edge. I felt Neil's hand grip my arm again. Stop looking over the edge. What is wrong with you? Keep your eyes on the ground. We're almost to the top. We eased our way up the path. It grew more narrow at the top, and we pressed our backs to the stone and inched along. I kept my head turned to the side and my eyes on the rocky path ahead. Eventually we reached a wide, flat expanse of rock. Boro was waiting for us. He stood beside a massive tree. The roots were entangled in the stone. The thick gray trunk was gnarled and covered with tufts of soft-looking gray moss. The branches towered above us, and we could see small huts amongst the mighty boughs. Welcome to my village, he said in his gruff voice. My people live above in the greatest tree, one of the few that has survived from the ancient times. I squinted up into the treetop. There was a faint glow of several pairs of eyes, but they scattered when I took notice of them. Can we meet your family? I asked, waving to the hidden people in the trees. No, was Boro's gruff reply. He was standing near a tangle of large roots. They trailed down the side of the rock and ended near a waterfall that fed into a rapidly moving river. I swallowed hard. Boro gestured to the roots again. Sit. Slide down the roots. Behind the waterfall there is a cave with an entrance to a tunnel hidden in its depths. That will take you to the Golden Hills. Golden Hills? Boro sighed at my confusion. Misha's land. That's where you're going, right? That's what they said. Who's they? Boro smiled a little. Your friends. Pretty little things, full of goodness. He glanced at me. I hope nothing happens to them. Are you talking about Gwen and Kaya? They're alive? Boro nodded. Yep. Let's keep it that way. He gestured to the slide again. His expression was dark and not especially friendly. Go on. Take your darkness elsewhere. We're a peaceful people. Neil stepped between us. You're not coming. Boro shook his head slowly. Nah. We guard the forest path. We choose who enters and who does not. What they do beyond our lands is not our concern. Be on your way. We want nothing to do with your war. I stared at him. War? Neil grabbed my arm and pulled me away. Come on, Jane. He's not willing to help us. Let's go before he decides to hurt us. Boro laughed. The sound boomed and echoed around the quiet forest. It sent a shiver through me. It was not a joyful sound. Jane. Ha-ha. That is interesting. Very interesting. He stared at me for a moment, but I could tell that he did not see me. He was lost in thought, but only for a moment. He quickly snapped out of it and shook his head. No, I've done what I was told to do. I will do no more. Go now. You're scaring my people. I stared at him a moment longer, but he did not budge. I moved to the roots and sat down. With one last look at Boro's somber face, I pushed off and began to slide down the smooth roots at an alarming speed. As I plunged down the cliffside, a small scream escaped me before the drop left me breathless. As the roots tapered off, my descent slowed, and I was deposited on a wide stone ledge beside the thundering waterfall. I lay there with my adrenaline coursing through my veins. Neil's shouts of merriment reminded me that he was close behind, and I moved just in time for him to come sliding down to rest in the place I had just occupied. The waterfall crashed into a nearby pool, which fed into a coursing river. The noise was deafening. Neil pointed to me and then to the waterfall. I nodded. We hurried up the path that ran along the cliffside and into the darkness beyond the crashing water. Neil hesitated for just a moment before disappearing behind the thick curtain of water. I paused, took a deep breath, and followed him. The force of the water almost took me off my feet. Neil grabbed my arm and pulled me through. Behind the curtain of water was a dark, damp opening in the rock. It was just tall enough for me to stand up inside, but Neil had to stoop. The air coming from the cave was cold, and I shivered as it made contact with my damp skin. Neil put his arm around me, and we stood for a moment in shivering silence and stared into the gaping darkness. And that is the end of Chapter 19, book lovers. I hope you're still enjoying Feelers. Remember to check out full episodes of M's Books and Cats podcast every Thursday, and I'll be back next Sunday for Chapter 20. Thank you so much for listening, and until next time, keep reading.